Luminary presents Therapy versus the World. I'm your host, Joe Nucci, and together, with the help of our very special guests, we're going to dive into the emotionally charged topics that affect your life every single day. We're going to talk about buzzwords that you hear and know, like narcissism, self-esteem, relationships, and so much more. Hopefully, you leave each episode understanding yourself and others just a little bit better. Today, I am honored and thrilled to be talking to Dr. Warren Farrell. Dr. Warren Farrell has been chosen by the Financial Times as one of the world's top 100 thought leaders. His books are published in over 50 countries in 19 languages. They include the New York Times bestseller, Why Men Are the Way They Are, plus the international bestseller, The Myth of Male Power. His most recent is The Boy Crisis, co-authored with John Gray. The Boy Crisis was chosen as a finalist for the Forward Indies Award. His forthcoming book, coming up in this July on couples communication, is Rollmate to Soulmate. We'll definitely have to touch base on that at some point as well. Dr. Farrell has been a pioneer in both the women's movement, elected 3 times to the board of the National Organization of Women in New York City, and the men's movement, called by GQ magazine the Martin Luther King of the men's movement. He conducts couples communication workshops worldwide. He has appeared on over 1,000 TV shows. That is just a staggering number of TV shows. And has been interviewed by Oprah, Barbara Walters, Peter Jennings, Katie Couric, Sean Hannity, Larry King, Tucker Carlson, Regis Philbin, and Charlie Rose. He has frequently written for and been featured in the New York Times and publications worldwide. Dr. Farrell has 2 daughters, lives with his wife in Mill Valley, California, and can be virtually found at warrenfarrell.com. So may I call you Warren, or do you prefer Dr.
Please,
Farrell?
No, Warren is
All right.
fine.
Well, Warren, it is such a treat to be able to sit down with you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Based on our initial contact, I just love your personality and your warmth. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that. There is so much I want to talk to you about, both in The Boy Crisis and some of the other works that you've published. But we're going to start with what we agreed on coming today, is to answering this question: is the mental health industry sexist towards men? And I know that question is going to raise the heart rates of some people listening, and a lot of people might think it has an obvious answer, maybe absolutely yes, maybe absolutely no. I would love it if you would talk a little bit about what your research has found on the statistics around mental health and men and boys. I know that there's a lot of that in The Boy Crisis, and if you have any updated statistics with COVID and everything that's kind of happened in the last few years, I would also be eager to learn about that too.
Yes. So the basic answer to the question, there's really 3 answers to the question about whether the mental health industry is sexist toward men. I said the first answer is yes. The second answer is yes. And the third answer is yes. And this isn't out of maliciousness, but I think here's a little bit of the background of this. You saw sort of the evidence in this in the American Psychological Association's evaluations of masculinity and assessments of masculinity, and how it was all about the negative side of masculinity and male privilege and male power and male assumption of being oppressors and not recognizing that they were. And, all of those things, except for male privilege, are true. And there's reasons for it. And females have female toxicity, just like males have male toxicity. But the lack of recognition of anything wrong with women and only things wrong with men have really made it so that the mental health industry has gone from being, when I was younger, about 80%, 90% of the people who got PhDs in psychology were male. Today, only about 20% of the younger people in psychology who become psychologists are male, and about maybe half of those heterosexual males. So the average heterosexual male going to a psychologist, what he meets is people like me. What am I? I'm much more of a nurturer connector male than I am a provider protector male. I mean, I think I'm about half of each, but I'm very inclined toward. I've spent 30 years of conducting couples communication workshops. This is understanding myself and other people and confronting myself and helping other people confront each other without feeling hurt. This is what I'm good at. I'm not good at building a bridge. You don't want to go over a bridge built by me. But so these are, so you get some sense here. Now, another way of looking at this is with the boy crisis research that I've been doing I did for 14 years before the book came out. And when I was doing that, I was astonished to see that the boy crisis was a global crisis, that it was in the 63 largest developed nations. Boys were falling behind girls in almost every area, including reading and writing, the two biggest predictors of academic success or failure. They were falling behind girls now, even in most countries, even in the areas that were typically the STEM type of professions, the scientific, technology, engineering, and math professions that were typically areas where boys were much ahead. The boys were committing suicide at 4 or 5 times the rate of girls. Their IQs had been going down 15 points in the last 30 years, as opposed to what normally happens with IQs is that each generation has a 10-point increase in IQs. Boys instead were going down. The sperm counts of males have decreased 50 to 60% over the last 40, 50 years, so that our sperm counts are less than half of what our grandfathers were. Now, that's not just a male problem. When male sperm counts go down, the health and fertility of females also goes down. And that's one example of how when one sex loses, both sexes tend to lose. And the homicide rates, the numbers of problems that boys were facing were were measurable on more than 70 different metrics. Far more likely to be addicted to drugs, to die of opioid overdose, to be addicted to porn, to be addicted to video games. Far more likely to drop out of high school, far more likely to suffer the consequences of dad deprivation. So I could go on and on until I put everybody listening to sleep. But the more important thing about all this is that if the reverse of this were true, that we would know if girls were committing suicide at 5 times the rate of boys in their 20s. We would know if adult females were committing suicide at 1,750% greater amount than males. That's what the statistic is in the reverse. We would know that a girl's life expectancy has been decreasing in relation to boys. 1920, the male life expectancy gap versus the female life expectancy gap in 1920 was just 1 year. Now it's 5.8 years, according to the recent Harvard study. And so if that was reversed and boys and men and women's life expectancy rate was equal in 1920, and now males were living 5.8 years longer than females, everybody would know about that. But virtually nobody knows about that. The only thing that has begun to penetrate the average person's psyche in the United States and in most developed nations is that girls are much more likely to graduate from college than boys are. That has sort of gotten out there. And part of the reason it's gotten out there is because females on college campuses have complained that they don't want to go to a college campus with a paucity of males. And so now, because females are complaining about that, there's beginning to be some special consideration for trying to get closer to equal percentages of males and females on the college campus. And so the single most important thing to understand about men and women is that when only one sex wins, both sexes lose. We're all in the same family boat. And so what has become heroic, when I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City, I was literally sort of hero at that point in time worldwide. And my income was extremely good. But when I began to talk about boys and girls problems and the problem of dad deprivation that boys and girls both experience after divorce or were brought up by single moms, I went from having 50, 60 speaking engagements a year down to 0 to 1. And so, a very substantial income practically turned into zero. And so and here's the psychology behind that. When I talk about the boy crisis, what happens in many people's minds is, especially women's minds, is they think to themselves, well, boys are boys today, maybe they're having problems, but soon they'll be men who have male privilege and male power. So they're not going to be having problems. So if you're focused on the problems of boys, and who are going to become the powerful one with privilege and that are evolving from the patriarchy that's designed to benefit men at the expense of women. If you're focused on that for a boy, you must yourself be a misogynist. And so that is an effective label to keep everyone's mouths shut. And that underlies the underlying bias that has penetrated the culture and also the mental health industry.
There's so much I want to reply to there. The first is this point at the end. If you use, let's say, economic privilege as proof that this is something that we don't need to be concerned about, isn't it interesting that even though men, by the statistics, may have more economic, make more money, is probably the best way to think about it, than other groups, than women, then why aren't they actually taking advantages of the different resources available to them, like in health or mental health? You talk a lot about in the book that there's actually a disconnect between men who actually prioritize their health. You refresh my memory on that piece. There was something you talked about how that doesn't seem to be as valued amongst men.
Oh, yes. I mean, the whole basically to become a male throughout history, you were trained for disposability, disposability in work or disposability in war. And so you see, even now in the Ukraine, the law was right from the very beginning that every male between 18 and 60, not 16, but 60, had to stay in the Ukraine and fight in the war. And if they tried to escape, they were subject to the punishment or imprisonment or whatever. The mandate for females was, if you want to participate, fine, but there's absolutely zero obligation. In the United States, there's male-only draft registration. So if your son is 18 and he doesn't register for the draft, he's subject to having his license taken away in 42 states. He's subject to having I think it's a year in prison. He's subject to a $250,000 fine, and he's subject to not being able to get a job at any post office or any government agency at any time in the future. And so we're still saying to males, now there isn't a male-only draft today, but there's male-only draft registration. And so the mental attitude, and we see all around us when the hostages are released in Gaza, it's the female hostages that are released, not the male hostages and the children. And even older men without medications are dying, but they're not released as soon as or at all. It's the females and the children that come first. And so there's so many indicators that I see, once you're conscious of it, there's indicators like this every day. So the core, I'll get to the core of that issue. So men are trained to be disposable in war and in the workplace. 93% of the people that are killed in hazardous jobs are males. And so when we are raising our sons, there's a part of us that loves them and wants them protected. And there's a part of us that is saying, well, if you go into the Marines or you go into the armed forces, really, or become a Navy SEAL, we are going to be proud of you. And so that creates a tear inside of a parent about loving. You can't become too psychologically attached to somebody you may lose as compared to someone that you expect you will never lose. And so the fact that we were all throughout history and throughout all of our biology, we all survived based on the willingness of men to die so we would live. That's a counter instinct to wanting men to live. Of course, we want men to live, but if we have our life threatened, then we want them to risk their lives in order to save ours. So it's a prioritization of men's lives, of women's lives over men's. And this in the workplace. And, nobody talks about, we talk about women in the workplace getting to high places, but not so much about coal mines, not so much as welders at the top of bridges. If it's any of the hazardous jobs, we're not fighting for women to be equal numbers of them. It's only mostly the privileged jobs, the doctors, the lawyers, the pharmacists, the dentists that we want women to be equally a part of, the executives.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the movie The Titanic, in which when the Titanic is sinking, it's the women and children get to go on the boats. And then at the end, it's a very, tragic and romantic love story. She gets to stay on the door, and Leonardo DiCaprio sinks to the bottom of the ocean.
Yes, that's called romance.
Yes. Let's connect some of these statistics to the mental health piece. So I'm not a doctor. I'm trained at the master's level. I believe my cohort at Northwestern University was approximately 111 people. We all got together for a group therapy experience when we were taking our techniques of group therapy and counseling course. And I remember looking around the room, and I remember counting approximately 9 men in the room. So that's, well under 10%. And I was often the only man in a lot of my classes and a lot of my group consults and group didactics. And even though I'm a confident person, I'm not afraid of saying something that I think, not just to hurt someone's feelings, but if I think the thing is true or important, to phrase it in a way that hopefully people can hear. And I will be honest, there were times where when gender issues came up, if I were kind of feeling tired that day, or I wasn't totally sure about the research or whatever it was, there were times here and there where I wouldn't say anything. And I think about that, and I think about how en masse over time, that is probably where the statistics are going to skew. When we speak about sexism or racism or heterosexism or any of these other buzzwords that and they're not buzzwords, these concepts that we talk about today, people would look at a hospital, let's say, where there's only male doctors or only white male doctors, and they would say, look, this disparity is statistical evidence of sexism or racism, and it's going to affect the care of the patients from the different groups, whether it's women or whether it's gays or lesbians or whether it's a non-white person. And I've been thinking about that in terms of mental health. If you go into New York City, just because that's where I live, if you go to the average group private practice, it's mostly women. Yes. I was actually looking at doing I've been getting trained in eating disorders. It's a more just kind of an ongoing clinical competency of mine that I've been doing on the side. I don't talk about it very much because I'm still learning so much. And I've been looking at different eating disorder treatment centers, and often I'm finding they actually have no men on their staff. And I just want everyone listening to understand that when I ask this question, is the mental health industry sexist towards men? You can just look at it just through those numbers. There's everything that you talked about, which I want to reflect on so much of it, but even just the statistics around suicide are absolutely heartbreaking. So many more men commit suicide than women. Now, someone listening to this might say something like, well, yeah, but more women are diagnosed with eating disorders, more women experience anxiety and depression, more women this, and maybe they're cherry picking, but what if they're actually bringing that up in good faith? What might you say to them when they're trying to wrestle with this question? Because it's a very difficult question to contend with.
Absolutely. So let me take this from the women's perspective for a moment.
Yeah.
When I was on the board of NOW, I was very good friends with a woman named Cynthia Epstein, and she developed a concept of the sole woman in a professional group. And when a woman came into an almost all male board, she often felt afraid to be able to speak up because she felt she'd have no support. And so that's what's happening in reverse in psychology today, that the male professional, as he's being trained, often feels he has no support. And remember that a good percentage of those male professionals are gay males. And so the heterosexual male often feels like that, particularly that he's part of what's the target of many feminists' ire. Particularly the white heterosexual male is sort of the enemy. And so if he speaks, so that's one thing. Second, look at the psychology of people like you and I. As I was mentioning before, you and I are much more I've conducted couples communication workshops for 30 years. Well, that's not your average working male who's out there, on a construction site or, driving a truck across the country and so on. So when that average male speaks to me, even, despite the fact that I've spent my life studying men, I'm still not him. And so that male and his problem, that is almost all males' problems, among them is the feeling that when we speak up, if we share our vulnerabilities to a woman that we love, that woman that we love may lose some respect for us. And so we often shut up because we know intuitively that a woman who loses respect for us loses love for us. So that's part of what encourages men to keep their feelings to themselves. Another part of what encourages men to keep their feelings to themselves, if I say to another male, let's say at work, and I talk to a male and say another man, and I say I'm having some problems with my wife and children and stuff like that. We're in a turmoil. I'm usually given by another male maybe a 1 or 2 minute window of opportunity to speak. And then if I don't pick up the hint about, what about the Super Bowl, or, who do you think's going to win, or some other distraction like that, I'm sort of I know and sense that I will lose his respect as well. And losing his respect, if he's at work with me, may mean losing the ability to be recommended for a promotion, which may mean losing the ability to have the respect of my family and have the money that my family needs to have a life that's better than it currently is. And so everywhere a male turns, he gets encouragement to keep his feelings to himself, even as we are simultaneously saying part of what men's problem is that they don't express their emotions. We say they don't, that's their problem when their emotions get all pent up and they come out in volcano form and violence form. But that's what happens to anyone that keeps their emotions pent up. So back to the tying this all into the psychology profession. When a working class male or a middle class male who's more traditional, or a Trump supporter type male, when he's dragged into a therapist's office, and the only person that's there is a female, and she tends to be feminist in her orientation, and believe that men already have the privilege and the power and they're part of the patriarchy. Does he feel encouraged to open up? I think it's sort of like a self-evident question/answer.
Right. Tell me a little bit about the expressing of feelings from your perspective across the different sexes or across the different genders. The literature, and just from my own clinical experience, I know that emotional suppression is associated with different mental health diagnoses. And I also know that there's been a lot of literature on homosocial bonding, in which if you put two women together and you're trying to measure the level of their friendship, there's a lot of eye contact, there's a lot of verbalizing of feelings, there's a lot of sharing of intimate details. Then there's also been studies done on male homosocial bonding, and they've shown that a lot of times they're not necessarily looking at each other, but they're looking at the same thing. So the example that comes to mind is like they're playing video games, they're hitting golf clubs, or like the joke amongst men, even gay men, is kind of like, you want to really bond with your buddy, like go for a drive or go on a trip, and you're looking for it. And that's kind of when you'll start to share these things. And I've thought a lot about this dynamic because I do treat mostly men in my practice, not through any sort of marketing or advertisement. It's just who reaches out to me most of the time. And I have found that I actually had to start to experiment with some of the assumptions I had about treating mental health when I was in my internship and practicum, and I wasn't the face of my practice. I just took whoever was given to me as a student. I had to start questioning some of the assumptions I made about how to facilitate therapy properly with men. Now, I'm not saying that men do not need to learn how to articulate and express their feelings, because I have seen that when they stop suppressing their emotions, there are things that do get better. I'm saying that there's this other dynamic, this other component, where sometimes what I think they were looking for or are looking for with me as their therapist is someone to help them feel competent or respected. Or like they don't regret, their decisions or who they are or whatever it might be. And so I really wanted to talk to you about that, because it's not something I was able to find in school. I don't necessarily find many books on it. I've gone out of my way to find male supervisors, whether, they're psychologists or other counselors like me, and that's been helpful. But it's just been kind of interesting that so many people say, well, more men need to go to therapy, when I recently saw a study that showed that the vast majority of men who attempted or committed suicide over a certain time period, most of them were in therapy, presumably being treated by women or at least by practitioners. And I know that can happen to any practitioner, but ideally it never happens that someone commits suicide while under your care. And so I wanted to throw that all at you and see what you think.
Yes. Well, first, just a quickie on this thing, which is not central to your point, but I think it's too much to put on a therapist that if somebody commits suicide in your care, that you were at fault. I mean, there are people who have, as you probably
Correct.
know, people, things in there. I just had a very good friend of mine. A very good friend of mine had her granddaughter was at Princeton and was, top in her class, and was, just at Thanksgiving, and was doing really well. And suddenly she committed suicide. But she and her therapist knew, as it turned out, as they asked more questions, that she felt there was a little part of her brain that just could not turn off that enormous depression, the need or desire to commit suicide. Now, where that comes from, and whether that's biological or whether it's epigenetically transferred, no one really knows, or at least I don't know. But I think that but when men do go to a good therapist, and you put your finger on the important point, was the word respect. Men who don't feel they are respected do not feel they will be loved. And there's almost always a way of respecting anybody, no matter what if they're at a therapist's office, you can respect them because whatever they're keeping to themselves, they're beginning to take a step toward not just repressing it, but expressing it. And that's something to respect. And whether that man is able to reveal it best by going for a walk with a therapist because he can be doing something, or watching TV, or playing football or something like that. Some men need that type of distraction to begin to open up, and other men feel really heard and seen by having their eye contact directly with the therapist, and which is, even though it may not be the way they are normally with their male friends, the fact that the male therapist is looking at them with eyes of understanding, the same reason we want a dog in our home. The dog looks at us with eyes of unconditional understanding, and we feel seen, even if the dog has no idea what's going on, except for the fact that the dog may sense that something is off about us at a given time. And so so we do need that. Going to a therapist is really helpful, but if you're but going to a male therapist, if you are a male, and the more traditional you are, the more important it is that therapists have some sense of common type of history, at least the type of common type of history of being a male, even if he's not a working class male like you have, or he hasn't driven a cab for all his life to be able to put his daughter through college so that she could come home at Thanksgiving and call him part of the patriarchy.
Mm. Yes. So two things. The first thing, I hope that my language earlier did not insinuate blame on a therapist who loses a patient while they're in treatment. It was more a commentary on the statistics that have come out that have shown that out of men who attempted or did commit suicide, so many of them were in therapy. And it's one of the impetuses that caused me to reach out to you and talk to you about this topic, because what you see on the internet or what you see talked about in culture is that, oh, well, men just need to go to therapy, and they certainly do, and therapy is certainly helpful. I am a therapist, I very much believe in it, but that statistic just still really alarmed me, and it particularly alarms me in light of the theme of the question that we're asking, around sexism, or at least disparity amongst outcomes amongst the sexes in mental health treatment.
Yes, absolutely. I get that.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to share with you is I wanted to share a couple of personal stories, because I think a lot of your research, when I read it the first time and as I was rereading it over the last couple of days in the boy crisis, watching your different interviews on YouTube and on other podcasts, it really, really resonated with me on a number of levels. The first is that I actually lost my dad at age 11, quite unexpectedly, which is a really interesting time to lose a parent, because you're old enough to remember it, but you've had them long enough where a lot of that foundational stuff is still there. You know what I mean? So my personal experience has been kind of, 1 foot outside of a lot of the themes that you talked about when it comes to single mother homes, but also that was very much my experience. And beyond that, I wanted to also talk to you about when I was in college, and I do believe this had to do with my own grief process and my own response to his death. I was on the water polo team and the swim team. And when I was a freshman in college, whenever we would have an away tournament, and it could have also had something to do with my sexuality as well, but I think that was less the case because Wesleyan was a very progressive and accepting school, and there were other gay male teammates. I always opted to sleep with the girls in the hotel. And it was over time, I developed some very, very wonderful male friends in college, and I worked through a lot of that personal stuff. I wasn't in therapy at the time, but having an all-male space, having an all-male men's team, joining a fraternity, we eventually co-educated. We eventually started accepting people of all gender expressions. Was really, really good for me. And when there was a movement on campus to co-educate, to make the single-sex male spaces co-educated, I wrote this op-ed. You can probably still find it on the Wesleyan Argus, and I was not raised in a political household. I didn't really know the sort of trouble I'd be finding when I published it, but I told about my story. I told about losing my dad, and I told about how having this all-male space on campus was so good for me, because I was able to kind of work through whatever I was working through around masculinity. And I all I really said is, there's obviously going to be, benefits to having, women in these all male spaces as well. But I think it's sad that future men won't actually be able to have this experience in college and grow the way I grew. And essentially, you would have thought that I, marched around with a swastika or something. I mean, the way I was protested and the comments, and I haven't thought about this in a very long time. I wasn't expecting to talk about it with you, given my content and my experience having a public presence now. But I mean, you would think I would have said something very, very offensive. And I remember a lot of people privately reached out to me and they said, thank you. This has been my experience of, the fraternity, the sports team, the whatever it might be. And I recall a classmate of mine, I think she actually went on to become a psychologist. She left this comment on the online version of the newspaper in which she said, I think a lot of men would share stories like Joe if they had the language or the courage, or I don't really know what to attribute it to. And I wanted to share this story with you because there's just so much there that relates to so much of what we're talking about in
Mhm.
terms of mental health and really opportunities for growth, opportunities
Mhm.
to get better. Whether or not they're baked into the culture or we're losing some of those opportunities is a completely separate question. And so I don't have a pointed or close question for you on that front, but I wanted to share it with you and just kind of see what you think. And if you can use my story to highlight some of the things that are going on in the broader culture, I would love to hear it and dialogue about it.
First of all, I think it's really what you just modeled now is really important for men is to sort of speak from their heart and speak from their story and speak from their background. People really learn for us as men. That often means we're being vulnerable, and that
Mm,
often makes us fear that we're going to be losing the respect of other people, and so we shut up and we keep those stories to themselves. And and you see this particularly when heterosexual men break up with women, they will oftentimes keep their feelings to themselves, whereas the women will go off and talk to other women, heterosexual women,
mm,
and the women will almost invariably all talk about how much worse Bill was than she thought, and he flirted with so and so here, but she didn't want, the other women didn't want to say anything to her because they didn't want, they thought that she was in a good relationship and they didn't want to undo that feeling. And then the women will usually, a second step will be the women will usually share their own stories about how terrible various men were with each other, with them,
mm,
and then the underlying conclusion or feeling will be, men are just pigs, or men are just liars, or men are just narcissists, or men are just, and so the good news in all that is that the woman feels supported.
mm,
And the bad news in all of that is if it doesn't make a transition from that full support to then saying to the woman, now you've had some time of support from us. What's the common denominator here in the last 3 relationships you've broken up with? It's
mm,
you. What is there about you that has contributed to that breakup? What is there about you that you're interested perhaps in reconsidering or changing?
mm,
And so if it doesn't move to stage 2, 3, and 4 that I just described, the woman who has been complaining about the breakup is not served well, and
mm,
oftentimes becomes very embarrassed when she finds that her attraction or the time has passed, and then she decides to reconnect with the man she broke up with, and now she's going back to a bunch of women who have all advised her and told her the best thing she's ever done in her life is break up with that guy. And now she's back with the guy that she's broken up with, who she's been advised to never see again. And
mm,
so these are some of the types of challenges that women do with each other that are oftentimes very problematic. And when women get together in these sort of safe spots in universities and they have them all to themselves, there's a danger of that type of not seeing the other sex's perspective to be more to be more apparent and more frequent.
mm,
And the same with with men in fraternities and sororities. Fraternities and sororities have a positive value, and many of them do very good things, and many of
mm,
them create friendships that last longer. People are much more excited usually about their sorority or fraternity reunions than they are about
mm,
their college reunions in general. But there's also a type of isolation that occurs in the fraternity reinforcement of male behavior that goes from the very good to the very toxic. And then the separation between the sexes, and the same with female behavior, and the separation between the sexes often leaves the sexes with a complete lack of ability to understand each other. So, for
mm.
example, among men, the commerce of masculinity is the trading of wit-covered put-downs.
Correct.
If we're with a group, particularly of heterosexual men, there will be just sort of like, I pat Joe on the belly and say, hey, Joe, you got a little growth there, eh? What month of pregnancy are you in? Um, and so, but if that man was in a workplace setting and he said that to another man in a workplace setting, the man would laugh. And if the guy said, hey guys, I think Joe is pregnant here, the other guys would laugh and laugh with him and laugh at Joe. But on the other hand, if he tapped a woman on the tummy and said, "Hey, Jill is pregnant. What do you think of that? Do you know?" The chances are Jill would report that to HR, human resources, not really human resources, but more HER, her resources, and that would be a potential for getting him fired. And so the challenge of the separate groups, the all male groups and the all female groups, is that the female never learns that the reason men do these wit-covered put-downs is to test out which men can laugh at themselves, to get in a sense of the fact that in order to become successful, you have to be able to be criticized. Find a president of the United States who has not been criticized. Or be a CEO or whatever, you will be subjected to criticism. So men constantly practice that criticizing of each other in tease form to make sure that each of the men becomes strong enough and resilient enough to handle it. Women don't get that practice from each other. What they get from each other is support, which is wonderful on one level, but they don't get that testing out of their resilience, testing out of their humility by being mocked and criticized. And that type of teasing and mocking is it's like a fruit smoothie with a little bit of wheatgrass in it. The wheatgrass is the criticism, the tease that has a little point to make about what you're doing wrong. But the fruit smoothie is the teasing, which makes it funny. If you're in the mood to get funny, if you're prepared to get funny from the teasing, to laugh from the teasing, then it becomes like a fruit smoothie that allows the teasing is like a fruit smoothie that allows the wheatgrass of criticism to go down more smoothly. But women, I don't know of a single woman that hasn't read The Boy Crisis or one of my books where I talk about these things, that has grown up understanding this. The exceptions to that rule are a woman or two in a family with 4 or 5 or 6 brothers.
And it may not just be women who don't understand that. I'm thinking, someone who grew up without a dad, and I was always a very sensitive child. In a lot of ways, I still am. It's one of the reasons why I think I excel at my clinical work, is that I didn't realize that when I was, I swam and played water polo growing up. And it wasn't until I was older and I was introduced to that distinction, because you've talked about this on other interviews before, where it was like, oh, I was being teased by a teammate in that way, and it wasn't because they didn't like me, it was actually because they liked me, and they were actually reinforcing this bond, because there's the testing of the one way to think of it is like the maturity, like are you able to be honest about yourself, are you able to kind of wear your flaws on your sleeve, but also do you realize that I like you even though you have those flaws. If I didn't, I wouldn't actually be teasing you about those things. And maybe I would have understood that more if my dad was around longer. And I'm glad I at least understand it now. This idea of doing it through humor, from a psychoanalytical perspective, humor is considered a mature defense. So it is defending against something that's emotionally painful, but it's mature. It's also like cynicism is also in this example. It's an adaptive manifestation. So that means that it's going to increase harmony with others and minimize conflict.
Yes.
How would you, when you work with people on communication, how do you help them walk that line? Because I would say, your example of, maybe commenting on someone's weight in the workplace, not something that I would recommend doing, by the way, regardless of whether or not you have an HR department, although I liked how extreme the example was. But how do you teach people how to walk that line? Because the line between intent and impact, it can be so thin in kind of figuring out where people are at. It also depends on, I think, probably a variety of factors. How do you help people think about that?
Well, first, in my workshops, I believe almost nothing, very little that I write in books do I talk about, do I work with a lot in my workshops. And the reason is that what I do in my workshops is teach. One of the things I do is I focus my workshop on 23 love enhancements. Example, the ability to handle personal criticism from a loved one without becoming defensive. So I have, one of my chapters has about 11 wisdoms, things that, like every virtue taken to its extreme becomes a vice, or the person that you married is also, or are partnered with, is also an example of the best choice of your values, things like that. And then I say the 11th wisdom is that when criticism appears, wisdom disappears. So all the things you're reading to take in as wisdom, when your partner criticizes you, those wisdoms were helpful to build a foundation, but they disappear temporarily because we are so biologically programmed. Historically speaking, if we heard if we heard criticism, we assumed it was an enemy. And so our natural defenses, our natural response was to build up our defenses so we wouldn't be killed by the enemy, or alternatively kill the enemy before the enemy killed us. Yeah. And that was very functional for survival. It's just terrible for love. So my workshops are about teaching people how to, in real life, in everyday life, to develop a practice that is counter our biologically natural propensities to respond defensively to criticism, counter to our biological propensities to have falling in love be natural, but have sustaining love be unnatural. And so it's all about training couples not only to be able to handle the personal criticism without becoming defensive, and knowing how to prepare for criticism ahead of time, and knowing how to set aside time where you're going to share your concerns, and before you share your concern, what type of alternative state of mindsets you can create to make sure you are completely receptive to the criticism before it comes, how to stop the criticism if you are not feeling receptive to it internally, and then how to have the 166 hours of your life, aside from those 2 hours you set aside to handle your partner's concern, have the other 166 hours of your life be a conflict-free zone. And how to handle the multiple things that come up during that conflict-free zone that will be tempted to seduce you out of that conflict-free zone. And so what my workshops are about are practicing these things in real life. Because even John Gottman, one of the foremost,
I was just thinking, similar to the Gottman research.
And he, one of the things he found, one of the things that actually inspired me to do the work on called Role Mate to Soulmate, that became both the workshop and the next book that's coming out. That's not Role Mate to Cellmate, it's Role Mate to Soulmate.
Key difference.
Yeah, key difference, exactly. So one of the things that inspired me to do this was John Gottman writing that while he is able to say exactly what I said in the workshop, that it's important to not respond defensively, that it didn't usually operationalize in real life once the actual criticism came. And that he really didn't, that was not part of what he was successful at doing. And so I spent years trying to figure out, is there a way around this? Is there a way where I can actually get people in their real life, everyday experience to actually be able to handle criticism without becoming defensive, and to, in fact, not only not do that, but also be able to associate being criticized with an opportunity to be more deeply loved, even as the criticism is happening. And so that's the practice that I teach in the Role Mate to Soulmate workshop. And I talk about it in the book, and then I put people through it in an online video. But I make that online video free for anybody who buys the book, because I know the book by itself will not work. The book by itself
Yeah.
can give you a wide panorama of wisdom, much more than I can have time for in a workshop, or even the online video, but it does not give you the practice.
So what I hear you saying is that as you learn how to deliver criticism, whether it's humor or just being very honest with a loved one, that is only half the battle. The other half of it is the person. There has to be someone at the reception desk to receive the package, and they have to be able to sort it in the mailroom of their mind and heart in a way that's actually going to be adaptive, that's going to help the relationship thrive.
Absolutely. So
Okay.
teasing, for example, is an extremely important thing, usually for a father to teach a child, because it teaches the child how to read little pauses. Like, that tummy of yours is getting to be, are you pregnant?
Oh.
Really? And sort of, if you watch Stephen Colbert or any great comedian, you will see the movement of the eyebrows. When the more outrageous something is, Stephen will, or any comedian will, just sort of pause afterwards to let you know that they're letting you absorb the humor of it and the flavor of it, and so on.
Right.
And all these things are very subtle ways of communication that if you protect your child from teasing, you're protecting them from a type of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And so all of these things can be, those things need to be learned and practiced at home by a parent. But in the workshop, when a person has a criticism, what I teach them to do is to save that criticism for a time in the week that I call a caring and sharing time, which is 2 hours that are set aside for both partners to be able to share just one concern that they have. They will call it a concern. The partner will experience it as a criticism, not a concern. And they share that one concern after they've shared two appreciations for their partner, and then their partner listens to that concern. But before they listen to that concern, they meditate into an altered state from our biologically natural state of defensiveness. So, for example, one thing I ask every couple to do is to sit up back to back and write on a piece of paper something that their partner will never see. And the question is, if your partner were about to be killed, and you knew, and with 100% certainty they would be killed, except that you would have a 100% chance of saving their life, but in the process you'd have a 50% chance of losing your life. If that were the situation, would you take that chance? Yes, no, uncertain. And the only thing I make as an exception is take children out of the picture. And so, and then I ask them the same question and say, if you wouldn't lose your life, would you be willing to risk a limb, an arm or a leg? And so about, just on the lose your life only question, about 90 to 95% of the men typically say, yes, they would do that. And about 80 to 85% of the women say, yes, they would do that. So then I turn to them as the first mindset and say, if I'm willing to risk my life for you, well, I guess I can listen to you.
Fair enough.
And it's like, well, yes. And even when somebody only says they're willing to do lose a limb or something like that, or, willing to give up their best car for the other person to live, they realize, well, it's even easier to give up the best to listen than to give up. You have to give up my best car, that type of thing. So,
right. I mean, it's a lovely execution of the door in the face technique, and it really just kind of like helps people process that in a very, very skillful way. As we get towards the end here, earlier in the conversation, you brought up solutions, and we talked about a lot. We talked about disparities in mental health care, the different mental health issues that men are facing, the We talked about different kind of communication things, some different cultural things. What are some solutions based on this conversation that you want the listeners to take away from this conversation? I would appreciate at least one or two of them to be focused at other clinicians, regardless of their gender.
Yes.
People who will be treating men in therapy.
Absolutely. I'd say the most important part of the Boy Crisis book that you can take a look at is the 7 major differences between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting. And things like roughhousing is more likely to be done by a dad, and a mom is likely to look on and say, oh my God, I feel like I have only one more child to monitor.
Correct.
It's so important to understand in the roughhousing example, what's the connection between roughhousing with your kids and the children developing empathy, good scientific data, longitudinal data on that
about
connection.
play.
About play. And it's also good scientific data on the connection between that roughhousing and the boundary enforcement that when dads do it, leads to the child having postponed gratification. And postponed gratification is the single biggest predictor of life's success or failure. It's in the roughhousing, the connection between that and the children learning the difference between being assertive versus aggressive, which is a core of social skills.
Totally.
Which is a core of children not feeling depressed and being inspired to do better in order to have more respect from peers. That's just on roughhousing. Then take a look at the section on teasing. Take a look at the section on risk-taking. Take a look at the section of, so just all of these, the science behind the differences between dad and mom-style parenting really helps us understand how to communicate with a man who's a father, to let him know how crucial he is, and therefore how crucial it is for both the mother and the father to do the work that they need to do communication-wise to make them stay together, not just out of the children's needs, but also out of their own and deeper love for each other, which is why I do the couples communication workshops. I don't want people just to have to be in a relationship and survive it for 18 to 25 years while the kids grow up. Give your kids the great gift of being able to witness your communication skills and your ability to resolve disagreements in front of you in a way that increases the love between the two of you. Many kids whose parents are really good at never seeing them, getting the kids to see them argue. When they first get into an argument with their spouse, they feel that the whole thing is terrible because they've never experienced an argument and seen it from beginning to end, and how the argument on the surface, when well executed and able to hear each other and able to work out the differences, is really a very key component of building a good, deeper love.
Yeah. Well, there's so much good stuff in there, not just for parents, not just for single parent households. I think there's implications there also for gay parenting. Like, what are the different styles if you have a lot of feminine or stereotypically masculine energy in a house? But it's also making me think about how I am with different patients in therapy. When I first became a therapist, and I don't know why, but I had this fixation where I was like, I'm not going to be a stereotype. I'm not just going to ask about your mother, and lo and behold, 6 months into treatment, they're crying, they're telling me about their mom or their dad and how I remind them of X. And I was like, oh, and I'm in the transference process with them. And so very much like a stereotypical shrink, it's just one of the first questions I ask now. I'm just like, tell me about it, because we're going to get there either way. Might as well get you there faster. But I bring it up because something I talked about in my content was, I say, the compassion, the validating, the you're so right, you're so perfect. That is only one half of my job as a therapist. And there is a lot of kind of reparenting dynamics that come up in therapy, which is very, very interesting from someone who is not a parent, at least not yet. But then there's this other side of it where it's, but I also want to push you. You're here to grow. You're here to transform. You're here to be something different and hopefully better than you are right now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily always agree with the nurturing, validating, all of your feelings are perfectly appropriate and you should act on the mindset that a lot of therapists practice. And I say that with the caveat that some patients need that more kind of feminine mothering style in their therapy. That is actually what is clinically required. But I feel like a lot of therapists don't necessarily get that other piece of the training, or they're not put in this kind of masculine and feminine terms. And this is not the same thing as saying that, there are no feminine fathers or no masculine mothers, or female therapists can't be this way. They absolutely can. But it's more
Absolutely.
about having access to all of it.
Absolutely. Yes. First of all, I want to make, I'm really glad you said the last part, because if you're a mother watching this, and you are a single mom, yes, you as a single mom can roughhouse. You as a single mom can encourage risk taking. You as a single mom can tease, but you've got to know. It helps to know why each of those things are so important. And every virtue taken to its extreme becomes a vice. You tease too much, it's a problem. You
Right.
roughhouse too roughly, it's a problem. Everything, all the male style parenting is very subject to too much, as is female style parenting. Nurturing your child and being there for them is wonderful. But if you become enabling, if you teach a child not to become resilient, if everything is never the child's fault, but always somebody else's fault, you teach your child to be set up for a lifetime of problems, and so on. And so one of the wonderful things that I discuss in the Boy Crisis book is checks and balance parenting, and how important that is. And and in the Role Mate to Soulmate workshop, I just teach people how to hear perspectives that are completely different from theirs, and how to turn what is different from theirs into checks and balance parenting, or checks and balance, relationships, so that they get the both out of each other rather than tear each other apart for being different.
Yeah. Absolutely. We'll have to have you back. There's so many different pieces of knowledge that you have and all this research done that we could, spend multiple episodes discussing them. So thank you again for coming on. And I'd like to leave the listeners with the note that for everyone who's watching this, this conversation is so important, not just for men, but really for everyone who cares about them, regardless of what your sex or gender is. Because like you said, if one gender is losing in a certain area, whatever it might be, we're all losing.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you. Certainly, there's nothing I feel more strongly about is that when only one sex wins, both sexes lose. Total pleasure.
All right. For those of you still listening, please go and like Therapy versus the World, or subscribe to Therapy versus the World on Spotify and or YouTube. It's the easiest way to support us. And remember that you can listen to episodes on Luminary that are both ad-free and early. Thank you.